evening and welcome. It is time once again for CU Immigration here on WRFU LP Urbana 104.5 FM and UPTV. I will be your host for this evening. My name is Mr. Garza, and I am here to let you know that WRFU is an open forum for the Urbana-Champaign community. Views expressed are those of the speakers and are not intended to represent WRFU or UCIMC. I have said this so many times, so I can't remember it. Or, as we like to say in the televised version of the show, UPTV. These views are our own. And by our in this instance, I mean myself and anyone's views who happen to leak through in the stories that I will happen to be reading. Okay, sorry. Off to a fumbling start. Let's hope that I don't keep that pace up. I'm going to get it back together and do much better, I hope. We'll see. So, the first story that I would like to read for you today is entitled Global Detroit Study Shows Immigration Can Rejuvenate Areas Across Detroit. I have talked about this, I don't know how many times before, about how there are so many areas and cities and places that are just losing population as people move to different places for better opportunities. Small towns are really suffering. Towns that were once big manufacturing areas, like Detroit, for example, are suffering because a lot of the manufacturing has gone overseas now. And so these places could really use new people, new blood, new energy, new enthusiasm. And so it looks like somebody agrees with me on this. Global Detroit apparently does agree with me on this. So let's see what they have to say. A recent study by Global Detroit, a nonprofit organization focused on strengthening the region through immigrant inclusion, shows how newly arriving people can present great opportunities for revitalization in areas of cities that may have been divested of their potential success. The study, Building Inclusive Cities, Immigration and Neighborhood Change in Detroit, focuses on the outcomes and benefits of the rapid immigration into Bangalstown, East Davison Village, and Chadsey-Condon in Detroit over a span of 2 years. Let me try that again. Bangaltown, East Davison Village, and Chadsey-Condon. I have never heard or said any of those things before, so I hope I got them right. Bangaltown, East Davison Village, and Chadsey-Condon. Let me try it again. Boy, I'm off to a bad start today. The study, Building Inclusive Cities, Immigration and Neighborhood Change in Detroit, focuses on the outcomes and benefits of the rapid immigration into Bangaltown, East Davison Village, and Chadsey-Condon in Detroit. Chadsey-Condon. Chadsey-Condon. In Detroit over a span of 2 years. Quote, Detroit is an official, welcoming city because Detroiters recognize the importance of helping immigrant families and business owners continue to put down roots in our city, says Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan. There is strength in diversity, and this study makes it clear the tremendous positive impact immigrants make strengthening our neighborhoods and our city. End quote. The study presents the various benefits that immigration can provide areas like Bangaltown, East Davison Village, and Chadsey-Condon, and even other post-industrial cities outside of Detroit. The study also provides reasons why immigrants may choose to come to these areas and what resources and strategies allow them to thrive. And that's how/what, not how or what. How/what resources and strategies. Here we go again. In Bangaltown, East Davison Village, and Chadsey-Condon I've got to leave this stuff in here because I should probably start over again and redo this and be very professional. But this is a local, cable TV show and a local radio show on alternative radio, shall I say, community radio and community TV. And, these are, a professional announcer probably would have read this through and looked up Banglatown East Davison Village or Chadzikondon and practiced it until they're fluent with it. But I'm just reading this for the first time. And so I'm not quite making my way through here with the aplomb that would be desirable or that I would prefer. So pardon me for my fumbling tongue. I'm having trouble with some of these words. And it's going to get even better because there's some names in here that look like they're going to be hard to pronounce. We'll see. Let me try this again. In Banglatown East Davison Village and Chadzikondon, Global Detroit found that the attraction to these areas compared to the city was the many quality of life indicators, both current and potential. Some of these indicators include residential stability, housing market activity, public safety, and more. Also, with Global Detroit's 10 years of experience of working in the city and past research studies, they were able to successfully record the information of 250 current residents, business owners, community leaders, and more people of different titles from the areas to produce a study that listed an even more thorough list of reasons for how immigrants can rebuild rundown areas. I think the person who wrote this is just trying to make it difficult for me. All right, I'm going to try that again just because I didn't do very well at all. Also, with Global Detroit's 10 years of experience of working in the city and past research studies. See, that's a weird sentence right there. 10 years of experience working in 10 years of experience of working in the city. How about if we take the of out? All right. Also, with Global Detroit's 10 years of experience working in the city and past research studies, that's better, they were able to successfully record the information of 250 current residents, business owners, community leaders, and more people of different titles. Okay. Yeah, with all sorts of titles. More people of different titles from the areas to produce a study that listed and even more. How about an even more? Okay. All right. Once again, here's another aside. Part of my problem reading these things is whoever edits them does not do a very good job. So it's very hard when there are words in there that shouldn't be there. So we're removing of and we're changing and to an. And more people of different titles from the areas to produce a study that listed an even more thorough list of reasons for how immigrants can rebuild rundown areas. Okay, that's much better. I really apologize to you today. This is actually funny to me, but it's probably annoying to you. Immigrants' contribution to Detroit are immense. They have helped make our city one of the greatest in the world, says Raquel Castaneda Lopez, Detroit City Council member. Global Detroit's research clearly shows the tremendous value immigrants bring to Detroit at the neighborhood level. It is important to do all we can in local government to help immigrants establish strong networks within their neighborhoods and access the resources and opportunities to help them build wealth and thrive. Some of the findings made by Global Detroit include population growth in the area compared to population decline in the city, improvement in community protection and safety, decreased property tax and tax foreclosures, signs of real estate market vitality, significant business growth, and many more positive attributes that came about in these areas immigrants chose to come to. Though one of the key findings was that immigration into these areas needed to be promoted and encouraged by the city's politicians and community leaders, as I have said before. Without the proper support and welcoming, as beneficial an area may be, there will never be proper attraction for immigrants to move. City decision makers must be committed to creating a diverse, multicultural network that will make their areas stronger and more successful than ever before. This study illustrates in clear terms that immigrant inclusion is a win-win proposition for Detroit and post-industrial cities across the U.S., says Steve Tabachman, Global Detroit's executive director. It is imperative that we create and revamp policies and programs across our city, state, and nation to make them more accessible to our ever-growing numbers of immigrant neighbors. At the same time, it is important to continue to honor the many contributions the long-time, largely African-American residents in Detroit and other legacy cities have made to their cities and neighborhoods. Our research demonstrates a need to strengthen bonds between newer immigrant and longtime residents in order to create neighborhoods that foster prosperity and well-being for all. Building Inclusive Cities, Immigration and Neighborhood Change in Detroit is available online at www.buildinginclusivecities.org. One whole long word, Building Inclusive Cities. Global Detroit has shared the report with policymakers, community and economic development organizations, and immigrant inclusion organizations, locally and nationally, as well as with residents in the two neighborhoods studied. To conduct this study, Global Detroit worked with Alan Malek and Data Driven Detroit. Additional funding came from the Hudson Weber Foundation in Detroit. So that's Detroit, but the same thing holds true for cities like St. Joe and Pasodum and, Decatur. I mean, my God, Decatur could stand a lot of people coming in there and doing something. Danville, for example, there are whole sections of Danville that are just like kind of empty, derelict, that could really be improved by having somebody there. So, I think these cities do themselves a great disservice by not reaching out to immigrants and welcoming them with open arms and saying, hey, look, we've got this infrastructure built up. We've got all this stuff. We've got places for you to live. We've got stores. We've got shopping. We have streets and parking and police and infrastructure of all sorts with gas and electricity and sewers and you name it. You're not starting from scratch. You can just come here and bang, you're off and running. All we need is for you to make that commitment to this, to live in this place. And these cities would just spring back to life. But far too many of them would just rather kind of, their fear of the unknown, the fear of the unknown people that they're not, that aren't like them is holding them back from welcoming what could be a wave of new vitality in life to their area. I've said that so many times, but I'm saying it again because I really think it's true. The heartland, as we call it, is not doing well, in large part because people are moving to cities. And, when you travel, if you do much driving around the Midwest, especially if you get off the superhighways, the 4-lane, gosh, I'm showing my age, superhighways. Yeah, well, that's what we used to call them. Now they're called highways. But if you get off the 4-lane highways and onto some of the smaller, older highways that are around, you'll see a lot of empty farmhouses that are just crumbling down. That's the result of consolidation of farms across the area where big conglomerates are just buying up a lot of farms and they farm the land. And sometimes it's cheaper for them to just leave the old house and barn sitting there till it rots. But, there's a lot of things like that. And the small towns that used to support the farmers that lived in that area who now no longer live there, they're all dying, or they're just kind of limping along with very few residents. And they could just be brought back to life with all these people that want to come here. They're dying to get here. And, instead the country is pushing them away. So I think that's a bad move. I think it's short-sighted. I've said it. Okay. I'm going to move on. This is entitled Immigrant Activists Say ICE is Purposefully Targeting Them. They're urging Biden to help. I've heard a lot of stories about this sort of thing, and it doesn't surprise me, but this may be news to you. Okay. For years, activist Maru Mora Villalpando has organized hunger strikes to protest conditions at an immigrant detention center in Washington state. By 2017, she'd gotten the attention of U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. One high-ranking ICE officer described her as an instigator in an internal email. Another responded that Mora Villalpando was a well-known local illegal alien and suggested that trying to deport her might take away some of her clout. A few weeks after those emails, ICE placed Mora Villalpando, who was born in Mexico, in deportation proceedings. For immigrant rights advocates, that email exchange is vindication of what they've been saying for years, that ICE deliberately retaliates against activists. It's a charge ICE consistently denies, but advocates say there's a growing body of evidence that can't be ignored, and they're urging the Biden administration to do something about it. Federal immigration officials are engaged in a sustained campaign of ICE surveillance and repression against advocacy groups and activists, according to a new report prepared by the University of Washington School of Law Immigration Clinic, with input from immigrant rights activists across the country. The report draws on interviews, court filings, and documents obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests. It documents a range of allegations from around the country: Texas, Washington State, Vermont, North Carolina, and Illinois, where advocates say they've been intimidated, spied on, and even deported for their activism. Some of the stories of activist retaliation have previously been told piecemeal, allowing someone to make the case that this is really about a couple of rogue officers from a particular field office, says Sejal Zota, the legal director of Just Futures Law, one of the groups behind the new report. Documenting the accounts of groups from around the country, I think it becomes clear that this is a broad and national problem. ICE denies retaliating against anyone. The agency says it is simply enforcing immigration law against people who are living in the country illegally. Quote, ICE condemns retaliatory enforcement against individuals who exercise their First Amendment right to speech and assembly, an agency spokesman said in a statement. Like all other law enforcement agencies, ICE monitors planned protests to ensure the safety and security of its infrastructure, personnel, officers, and all those involved. But sometimes activists come to ICE's attention because of their work. Mora Villalpando, 50, did not try to hide her immigration status. She came to the U.S. from Mexico City and has lived here since the 1990s after overstaying a tourist visa. She has no criminal record. Mora Villalpando openly discussed her immigration status in interviews, even as she co-founded a group called La Resistencia and began protesting conditions at ICE detention centers in 2014. Immigration authorities did not place Mora Villalpando in deportation proceedings until years later, around the same time that 2 U.S. representatives from Washington State asked to bring her along as one of their guests on a tour of ICE's Northwest Detention Center, as it was known then, in Tacoma, Washington. As she self-proclaims to be an illegal alien, we should plainly say to the congresspersons that she should not be allowed into the facility, wrote Mark Moore, the incoming head of ICE's Seattle office, in an email in November of 2017. At the time, the Trump administration had recently lifted Obama-era policies that limited who ICE agents could target for arrest or deportation. Under Trump's enforcement rules, ICE officers were free to detain anyone they encountered who was in the country illegally, including activists like Mora Villalpando. In fact, we had been planning on placing her into proceedings, Moore wrote. It will, of course, make the news, but we cannot continue to ignore her status here under the new enforcement policies. Oh, I see. Ignore here, sick status, meaning ignore her. If ICE was trying to silence Mora Villalpando, it didn't work. She fought the agency in court, eventually obtaining internal agency emails and other documents, including the email where Moore suggested that placing her in removal proceedings might diminish her clout. I even had to look up that word. I didn't know that word in English, Mora Villalpando said in an interview with NPR. Still, she says, it was very clear that ICE didn't like my work. Advocates say Mora Villalpando's case and others documented in the new report are textbook examples of retaliation, and they want the Biden administration to address it. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas was asked about alleged retaliation during an interview in April at a virtual conference organized by the University of California, Los Angeles, Center for Immigration Law and Policy. "That is unacceptable," Mayorkas said. "Retaliation in response to the constitutionally protected right of free speech and, quite frankly, the civic obligation to protest government positions with which one disagrees, that's just unacceptable." When asked whether he would consider reviewing cases of alleged retaliation, Mayorkas said Mayorkas said he'd want to look more deeply into specific allegations first. "I do owe it to my colleagues in the department to give them due process with respect to the basis of the removal, and I have not delved into the evidence, and I do believe in doing so," he said. Immigrant advocates were glad to hear Mayorkas condemn retaliation, but they want the administration to go a step further. They're calling on Mayorkas to take a formal stand against retaliation in the official ICE enforcement guidelines he's expected to issue in the next few months. Specifically, activists want immigration officials to exercise prosecutorial discretion in the cases of organizers and activists, and to bring home immigrants who were deported or targeted for deportation because of their work. Otherwise, activists say, they're concerned that retaliation and surveillance of activists will continue. Activist Claudia Munoz says ICE banned her and a colleague from visiting immigrants at a detention center in Texas. "They had printed our licenses and put them on the wall of the detention center and said these folks are not allowed inside," Munoz tells NPR. ICE never told Munoz why she was banned from the facility, she says, but she suspected it was in retaliation for her work as the co-director of Grassroots Leadership, an immigrants' rights group in Austin, Texas. The group had recently helped expose the story of a woman who said she was sexually abused by a guard at the T. Don Hutto Residential Center in Taylor, Texas. Munoz's lawyers filed a Freedom of Information Act request to find out more. That's how she learned that ICE had been gathering information about her, including her immigration records, as well as surveillance videos and photos from her personal social media accounts. That was particularly terrifying for Munoz because she was undocumented at the time, as were members of her family who also appeared in the photos. "It was really disturbing what they were doing," Munoz says. "I was scared for my family." Ultimately, ICE did not take any further action against Munoz or her family. An immigration judge granted her permanent residency in March. Mora Villapando is still fighting her deportation case. Since the agency placed her in removal proceedings, activists in Washington succeeded in pushing the state to prohibit for-profit detention centers. They hope to shut down the ICE detention facility in Tacoma by 2025. In her case, Mora Villapando believes ICE's aggressive tactics backfired. "They gave us a larger microphone, a larger bullhorn to say this is wrong and this is why we're going to continue fighting," she says. "I've always believed that when we get attacked, it's because they're afraid of us." So that's an interesting article. I mean, we've talked about this before, and you probably remember it. And it's one, where people can disagree and say, well, if these people are undocumented and they're not here legally, then ICE has every reason to remove them. But the point is a little different because immigration violations are not crimes. You're not stealing anything from anybody. You're not hurting anybody. You're not causing damage. You're not doing any of these things. So being here without proper documentation is simply being here without proper documentation. It is a problem, a paperwork problem that needs to be solved in some way. But anti-immigrant activists have pushed and shouted and twisted and done so much to turn it into something where people see it as like a big crime that somebody has to do something about. We must respond to these criminals. And with that attitude, then yes, it certainly makes sense that if criminals are causing extra problems beyond just their criminal behavior, which is being here, then we should fight to get them out of here. But that's not the situation at all. These are people that are here. They have paperwork difficulties. They have problems with their paperwork. However you want to look at it, that means that their documents are not in order in terms of being citizens or not citizens, or being legally resident in this country or not. And on the side, they're activists working on behalf of their brethren, I guess you could say, put it that way. And that goes against the mandate that a lot of people that are in immigration enforcement, ICE in particular, seem to think they have, which is we've got to get rid of all these people here that are undocumented or illegal, as we prefer to say it. And that's not what their job is. I mean, their job is to enforce those laws as specified by the government. So when the government says, all right, we're going to enforce these penalties against people who have had other infractions, they've broken other laws, they have proven to be a danger, those people come first. Those people should come first, not people who just happen to be agitating and maybe annoying some local ICE official. So it really is not right to target these people in particular for deportation. I know I'm arguing against people that wouldn't listen to this show anyway if you paid them, but it's just still it's really annoying that the kind of ways people think about this that are not right, and they're demonstrably not right, and yet they continue to seek justification for thinking this way. Anyway, change of gears here. So we were very critical of the Trump administration. We, meaning me. Anybody that ever came on the show, I think, was pretty much uniformly critical of Trump administration. But we wanted to give the Biden administration some time to get it right, and there is some, it's troublesome. So I've got a couple of articles about how Biden is doing right now as seen by some different people. This first one is entitled, Biden's Immigration Policy Isn't Trump's, but It's Still a Disappointment. So let's see what they have to say. When President Joe Biden took office, many immigrant advocates were cautiously optimistic that the tide would be changing for their cause. Unlike their predecessors, Biden and his officials don't use language demonizing and dehumanizing migrants. They have vowed to address the root causes of migration in Central America, acknowledging that the problem doesn't begin at the U.S.-Mexico border. They have undone some of the Trump administration's most anti-immigrant policies, from his travel ban on several Muslim-majority countries to the so-called Remain in Mexico policy that required asylum seekers to stay in Mexico while awaiting their immigration court dates in the U.S. And they have pushed legislation, albeit so far unsuccessfully, to legalize large swaths of the population of undocumented immigrants living in the U.S. and reinvent a broken immigration system.